The fluorescent lights of Meridian Tech Solutions buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Joseph Scott pushed his cleaning cart down the empty corridor at 2:15 a.m. The wheels squeaked in a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to his survival, a far cry from the confident stride he'd once taken through these same hallways as a senior marketing analyst just 14 months ago. 14 months. That's how long it had been since his world shattered in a pediatric neurologist's office in downtown Seattle, when Dr. Williams delivered the words that would reshape everything. "Mr. Scott, your son Ethan has been diagnosed with severe ADHD and sensory processing disorder. He'll need intensive support, specialized schooling, and consistent therapeutic intervention." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Joseph paused outside the corner office that had once been his, remembering the awards on the walls, the strategic campaigns he'd launched that generated millions for Meridian's clients. The irony cut deep. He was now invisible to the very people who had once sought his expertise, reduced to emptying their trash cans while they slept peacefully in their suburban homes. 8-year-old Ethan needed him, not just wanted, needed. The meltdowns that could last for hours, triggered by anything from unexpected changes in routine to the texture of his school lunch. The daily calls from Riverside Elementary when Ethan couldn't regulate his emotions or focus on tasks that seemed simple to neurotypical children. The therapy appointments 3 times a week that cost $200 per session and weren't fully covered by insurance. Joseph's ex-wife Sarah had made her position clear during their divorce proceedings 6 months after Ethan's diagnosis. "I didn't sign up for this, Joseph. I married you expecting a normal family, not a lifetime of dealing with a difficult child." She'd moved to Portland for her career, sending minimal child support and visiting Ethan twice since the divorce was finalized. Now it was just Joseph and Ethan against a world that seemed designed to punish fathers who couldn't compartmentalize their lives into neat, corporate-friendly packages. The rejection emails had started arriving within weeks of requesting accommodation at Meridian. Could he work from home 2 days a week to manage Ethan's therapy schedule? Not compatible with our collaborative culture. Could he adjust his hours to handle school pickups and behavioral crises? We need team members who can commit to standard business operations. The final blow came when his supervisor, Jennifer Walsh, delivered the verdict with corporate-speak precision. "Joseph, your recent performance metrics show decreased availability and focus. We've decided to restructure your position to better align with current business needs." Restructured, eliminated, fired for being a devoted father. The months that followed blurred together in a haze of job applications, interviews that went nowhere, and slowly depleting savings. His marketing degree from University of Washington, his 5 years of award-winning campaigns, his proven track record of increasing client revenue by 340%. None of it mattered when potential employers learned about Ethan's needs. "We need someone who can stay late for client presentations," they'd say politely. "This role requires weekend availability for project deadlines. We're looking for candidates with more flexibility in their schedule." Translation: fathers with special needs children need not apply. The custodial position at Meridian Tech Solutions paid $13.50 an hour with no benefits, barely enough to cover their studio apartment in Belltown, let alone Ethan's mounting therapy costs. But the work happened between midnight and 6 a.m., while Ethan slept under the watchful eye of Mrs. Kim, their 72-year-old neighbor who understood what it meant to sacrifice everything for family. Joseph moved through the executive offices like a specter, cleaning the spaces where decisions were made about people like him. He dusted the mahogany desk of CEO Marcus Blackwell, a man who earned more in a day than Joseph would see in 6 months. He emptied the trash bins of vice presidents who made strategic choices without ever considering the human cost of their policies. The building felt different at 3 a.m. During daylight hours, Meridian buzzed with innovation meetings, client calls, and the relentless energy of Seattle's booming tech scene. But in the pre-dawn darkness, it became a mausoleum of ambition where Joseph's footsteps echoed through corridors lined with motivational posters about work-life balance and employee empowerment. Tonight felt heavier than usual. Ethan had struggled at school again, overwhelmed by the noise in the cafeteria that sent him into a sensory overload meltdown lasting 2 hours. His teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, had been patient and understanding, but Joseph could see the strain in her eyes. Ethan needed more specialized support than the public school system could provide, programs that cost money Joseph didn't have. The medical bills scattered across their kitchen table told a story of impossible choices. Occupational therapy, $185 per session. Behavioral intervention, $215 per session. ADHD coaching, $150 per session. Insurance covered 30%, leaving Joseph to choose between Ethan's development and basic necessities like groceries and utilities. He'd submitted 47 job applications in the past 2 months, marketing coordinator positions that required evening client events, project manager roles that demanded weekend availability, communications specialist jobs that expected travel and unpredictable hours. Each opportunity evaporated when he explained his need to be available for Ethan's school schedule and medical appointments. "We need someone who can be fully committed to the role," they'd explain, as if loving your child meant you couldn't excel professionally. Joseph squeezed the handle of his mop harder, channeling his frustration into the physical work that at least provided measurable progress. Clean floors, organized supply closets, spotless windows. Small victories in a life that felt increasingly beyond his control. What Joseph didn't know was that someone had been watching him for the past 3 weeks. Hidden among the late-night maintenance crew was Alexander Morrison, the billionaire founder and CEO of Morrison Industries, the parent company that had acquired Meridian Tech Solutions 8 months earlier. Disguised as Alex Martinez, a facilities worker complete with work boots and a maintenance uniform, he'd been conducting the most important investigation of his 15-year career. Alex had witnessed Joseph's meticulous attention to detail, his instinctive kindness toward fellow night shift workers, and most importantly, his quiet dignity despite circumstances that would have broken many people. But tomorrow night would bring the moment that changed everything. When Alex would witness Joseph make a sacrifice that revealed the depth of his character and forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about the companies he'd built and the society that systematically failed remarkable people like him. The clock above the security desk showed 4:47 a.m. In 8 hours, Joseph would face another impossible choice that would test just how much he was willing to sacrifice for the son who meant everything to him. He had no idea that his next act of paternal love would create ripples that would transform not just his own life, but the lives of thousands of employees who had been waiting their entire careers for someone to finally recognize their true worth. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The alarm clock's jarring beep pierced the silence at 6:30 a.m., but Joseph Scott was already awake, staring at the ceiling crack that had grown longer since last month's rain leak. He'd been mentally calculating again. Therapy appointment at 3:15, grocery money that needed to stretch until Friday, the electric bill notice that couldn't be ignored much longer. He slipped quietly from the narrow pull-out couch he'd claimed as his bed 6 months ago, giving Ethan the apartment's only bedroom. The arrangement wasn't ideal, but it allowed Joseph to respond immediately to his son's nighttime episodes while keeping their living space organized around Ethan's sensory needs. In the dim morning light filtering through their small apartment windows, Joseph paused at Ethan's doorway, watching his 8-year-old son sleep with the peaceful expression that only came during rest. His sandy brown hair stuck up at odd angles, and his arms wrapped tightly around the weighted stuffed dinosaur that helped regulate his nervous system through the night. The sight never failed to fill Joseph with fierce protective love mixed with overwhelming responsibility. Ethan's therapy journal lay open on the nightstand, a thick binder filled with progress charts, sensory tracking sheets, and colorful drawings that documented his small victories. Each page represented another step forward in his journey, another reason Joseph couldn't afford to give up. The journal had become their shared project, with Ethan spending hours creating elaborate pictures, while Joseph wrote detailed notes about triggers, successes, and emerging coping strategies. Mrs. Kim had helped Joseph understand that these drawings showed Ethan processing his world differently than neurotypical children. The repetitive patterns he drew weren't random. They were his way of creating order from sensory chaos. His favorite pictures showed him and his dad working together, building elaborate structures with hearts for windows and doors that opened to sunny skies. Joseph padded to their small kitchen, muscle memory guiding him through the morning routine that had to be perfect, consistent, and calming for Ethan's sake. Coffee first. The generic brand that tasted like bitter water but contained enough caffeine to fuel another day of survival. While it brewed, he prepared Ethan's breakfast with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to marketing presentations. Oatmeal with exactly 2 tablespoons of honey, sliced bananas arranged in groups of 3, orange juice in the blue cup with the small chip around the rim. Any deviation from this routine could trigger a meltdown that would derail their entire day. 18 months ago, Sarah had handled the morning routine, while Joseph focused on his marketing coordinator position at Meridian Tech Solutions. They'd been a team, not wealthy, but comfortable enough to dream about Ethan's future, to research the best schools and therapies, to believe that love and determination could overcome any challenge. Sarah had initially seemed supportive when Ethan received his diagnosis, but her patience wore thin as the reality of long-term commitment became clear. She'd approached each obstacle with growing resentment, researching specialists not to help Ethan, but to find someone who might fix him quickly so their lives could return to normal. The divorce had been swift and brutal, Sarah citing irreconcilable differences, while making it clear she couldn't handle a child who required so much specialized attention. She'd moved to Portland within weeks of the papers being finalized, promising regular visits that quickly dwindled to occasional phone calls and birthday cards. Joseph shook himself from the painful memory and focused on the present. Ethan would wake up soon, and he needed his dad to be steady, predictable, safe. His routine was sacred. Breakfast at 7 o'clock, favorite green shirt with the dinosaur, backpack checked twice, affirmations spoken aloud. Today will be a good day. I am brave. Dad loves me. The coffee finished brewing with a tired gurgle, and Joseph poured himself a mug, adding a splash of milk that was 1 day past expiration but still smelled acceptable. He settled at their small kitchen table with his laptop, a 5-year-old machine that took 4 minutes to boot up, and opened his email. 12 new job alerts, 9 automated rejections from previous applications, and 3 emails from creditors with subject lines he didn't want to read. He clicked through the job postings methodically. Marketing specialist, evening and weekend availability required. Project coordinator, must be available for rotating shifts. Business development manager, extensive travel required. Each posting might as well have included, single fathers need not apply in bold letters. The corporate world hadn't adapted to the reality of workers who had responsibilities that didn't disappear after 5 p.m., who needed predictability and flexibility to provide proper care for family members with special needs. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Kim. Good morning, Joseph. Made extra soup yesterday. Will leave some by your door before I go to market. You're doing wonderful work with Ethan. Never forget that. The kindness brought unexpected moisture to Joseph's eyes. Mrs. Kim had raised 3 children as a single mother after her husband's death 40 years ago and understood the weight of carrying a household alone. She never offered help in a way that felt like charity, just small gestures that happened to make life a little easier. Fresh vegetables from her community garden that she'd, quote, accidentally bought too many of, and offered to watch Ethan during job interviews, presented as a favor to her because she enjoyed his company. Dad? Ethan's voice drifted from his bedroom, followed by the soft shuffling of feet in his compression socks. Good morning, buddy, Joseph called, closing his laptop and shifting into the role that made everything else bearable. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair a magnificent tangle, clutching his dinosaur with one hand while fidgeting with a stress ball in the other. He approached the morning with the same methodical care that Joseph brought to job searching, checking each element of his routine. Dinosaur present, Dad smiling, kitchen smelling like coffee, and breakfast cooking. Is today a good day? He asked, their morning ritual beginning. Today is going to be a very good day, Joseph replied, lifting him onto his lap for their morning hug that lasted exactly 45 seconds. Any longer overwhelmed his sensory system. What makes it good? Dad loves you. You are brave. You can do hard things, Ethan recited, his voice gaining confidence with each phrase. That's exactly right. And what are we going to do today? I'm going to school, then therapy with Mr. Davis. Then we're going to make dinner together and read stories. Perfect plan. But first, what do we need to do? Breakfast. Ethan giggled, sliding from his lap to retrieve his special bowl. As Ethan carefully ate his oatmeal, Joseph reviewed the afternoon schedule that required split-second timing. School pickup at 2:25, therapy from 3:15 to 4:15, grocery shopping before 5 o'clock when Ethan's energy crashed, then home for the evening routine that helped him process the day's experiences. The rejection emails continued arriving throughout the morning, each one a small knife twist in Joseph's already battered confidence. Pacific Marketing Group had seemed promising during the phone interview until they learned about his constraints. "We really need someone who can participate in evening networking events and weekend strategy sessions," the hiring manager had explained apologetically. What Joseph didn't know was that Alexander Morrison, still disguised as maintenance worker Alex Martinez, had been documenting the struggles of employees like him for 3 weeks. He'd witnessed the quiet desperation of night shift workers juggling impossible schedules, the exhaustion of single parents trying to provide for children with special needs, the dignity of people who continued working excellently despite circumstances that would break most individuals. Today would bring the moment that changed everything, when Alex would witness Joseph make a sacrifice so profound that it would force him to confront the human cost of corporate policies he'd never questioned. But for now, Joseph focused on what he could control, making Ethan's day as perfect as possible, getting him safely to school, and preparing for another night of invisible work in the shadow of a company that had no idea how much untapped potential walked through their building after dark. The gentle determination that would spark a corporate revolution was building quietly in a small Seattle apartment, one morning routine at a time. The rejection emails arrived like clockwork, each one a small knife twist in Joseph's already battered confidence. He sat in the parking lot of Riverside Elementary, 20 minutes early as always, scrolling through responses that had become painfully predictable in their polite dismissiveness. "Thank you for your interest in the senior marketing analyst position. While your qualifications are impressive, we've decided to move forward with candidates whose availability more closely matches our business needs." Translation: We need someone who can stay until 9 p.m. and work weekends without question. We appreciate the time you took to interview for the project manager role. Unfortunately, we require someone with more flexible scheduling arrangements to accommodate our client-focused environment. Translation: Your child's needs are inconvenient to our profit margins. Joseph deleted each email methodically, adding another company to his mental list of organizations that viewed working fathers as inherently unreliable. The mathematics were cruel but simple. Ethan needed pickup by 2:30 p.m., therapy 3 times per week, and consistent evening routines. Corporate Seattle needed bodies that could be deployed without consideration for human complexity. His phone rang with a call from Innovate Solutions, where he'd interviewed 2 weeks ago for a communications role that seemed perfect until the hiring manager learned about his constraints. "Mr. Scott, this is Michael Chen from Innovate Solutions. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about schedule flexibility." Joseph's heart sank. He'd hoped this one might be different. "After discussing with our leadership team, we've decided that the role requires someone who can participate fully in client dinners and industry networking events, which typically happen outside traditional business hours. I'm sure you understand." Joseph understood perfectly. He understood that being a devoted father disqualified him from professional opportunities. He understood that corporate networking happened in spaces that excluded people with caregiving responsibilities. He understood that his marketing degree, creative abilities, and proven track record meant nothing compared to his inability to abandon Ethan for evening cocktail parties. "I appreciate you letting me know," Joseph said, proud that his voice remained steady. After ending the call, he sat in the silence of his aging Honda Civic, watching other parents arrive for pickup. Some drove luxury SUVs, talking animatedly on Bluetooth calls about client meetings and strategy sessions. Others looked as exhausted as Joseph felt, single mothers juggling impossible schedules, fathers working multiple jobs, families held together by determination and caffeine. The divide was stark. Parents with flexible resources could maintain professional careers while managing family responsibilities. Parents like Joseph, who couldn't afford specialized childcare or after-school programs, found themselves systematically excluded from opportunities that required traditional availability. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Kim. Joseph saw the Meridian night custodial posting on community board. Not ideal, but it's income during Ethan's sleep hours. Building at 1847 Technology Boulevard. Joseph's stomach tightened. Custodial work represented another step down from his professional identity, but it also meant income during hours when Ethan slept. He couldn't afford pride when rent was due in 6 days. The school bell rang, and Joseph watched Ethan emerge from the building with his careful scan of the pickup area. He moved differently than other children. more deliberately, more cautiously, processing sensory input that could overwhelm his nervous system without warning. When he spotted their car, his face lit up with the pure joy that made every sacrifice worthwhile. "How was your day, buddy?" Joseph asked as Ethan climbed into his booster seat, immediately reaching for the noise-canceling headphones that helped him decompress. "Good. We learned about marine animals, and Ms. Rodriguez said my reading comprehension is improving. But the lunchroom was really loud today, and someone's perfume made my head hurt." Joseph understood the subtext. Ethan had managed well despite sensory challenges, demonstrating the resilience that amazed him daily. Other parents complained about typical childhood problems: homework resistance, friend drama, sugar crashes. Joseph celebrated Ethan's ability to remain regulated in environments designed for neurotypical children. During the drive to therapy, Ethan chattered about dolphins and the whale sounds he'd heard on an educational video, unaware that his father was mentally calculating whether he could afford to pay Dr. Kevin Davis for this session. The behavioral therapist had been patient about late payments, understanding that Joseph prioritized Ethan's development over his own financial stability. At Northwest Behavioral Health Center, Joseph walked Ethan to Dr. Davis's office, where sensory tools and calming colors created an environment designed for children who experience the world differently. The space represented hope, proof that with proper support, children like Ethan could develop emotional regulation skills and coping strategies. "See you in an hour, buddy," Joseph said, ruffling his son's hair. "See you in an hour, Dad. I hope your worry lines get smaller." In the waiting room, Joseph opened his laptop and researched Meridian Tech Solutions more thoroughly. The company specialized in software development for healthcare systems, employed 200 people, and had recently been acquired by Morrison Industries, a conglomerate known for aggressive restructuring measures. The night custodial position paid $13.50 per hour with no benefits, barely enough to cover rent, much less Ethan's therapy costs. But it was work that happened while Ethan slept, supervised by Mrs. Kim, who had become their family's guardian angel. Joseph submitted his application, knowing he was dramatically overqualified, but hoping desperation didn't show through his carefully crafted cover letter. Around him, other parents waited for their children's therapy sessions. Some scrolled through phones, others read magazines, a few worked quietly on laptops. Joseph recognized the expression of controlled anxiety that characterized parents of special needs children. The constant worry about progress, the financial stress of ongoing interventions, the exhaustion of advocating for children in systems not designed to support them. His phone rang with a call from Skyline Marketing Associates, where he'd interviewed 4 days ago. "Joseph, this is Rebecca Martinez. I wanted to discuss your availability concerns." Joseph's pulse quickened. Rebecca had seemed understanding during their conversation about Ethan's needs. "We really appreciated your portfolio and strategic thinking. Would you consider a consulting arrangement? 20 hours per week, with significant flexibility around your son's schedule?" For a moment, Joseph allowed himself to hope. Part-time professional work could bridge the gap between survival and stability, providing income while honoring his responsibilities to Ethan. "That sounds very promising. What would the structure look like?" "Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. with one client meeting per month that might extend into early evening. The compensation would be prorated, obviously, but we think your expertise could really enhance our family-focused marketing campaigns." Joseph felt hope building in his chest. 20 hours per week wouldn't cover their full expenses, but it represented dignity, professional identity, and the possibility of building towards something better. "Rebecca, that sounds perfect. When would you need a decision?" "Actually, Joseph, I need to be transparent with you. I discussed this with our managing partner, and he's concerned about the precedent of accommodating individual scheduling needs. He worries other employees might request similar arrangements and it could complicate our team coordination." The hope deflated as quickly as it had emerged. Joseph had heard this story before. Initial enthusiasm followed by administrative anxiety about treating working parents as human beings rather than interchangeable resources. "I understand," Joseph said, though he didn't understand why compassion was viewed as a business liability. After ending the call, Joseph sat in the therapy center parking lot, adding Skyline Marketing Associates to his growing list of almosts and if-onlys. Each rejection reinforced the same message. His love for Ethan made him professionally worthless. When Ethan emerged from his session, chattering excitedly about the communication strategies he'd practiced with Dr. Davis, Joseph forced himself into paternal mode. Ethan didn't need to know about adult disappointments or impossible choices. He needed consistency, optimism, and the belief that tomorrow could be better than today. "Ready for grocery shopping, buddy?" "Ready, Dad. Can we get the crackers that look like whales?" "Of course we can." As they drove toward the grocery store, Joseph made a decision. He would take the Meridian custodial job, swallow his professional pride, and work nights while Ethan slept. It wasn't the career he'd planned, but it was survival with dignity intact. What Joseph didn't know was that Alexander Morrison had been monitoring the application process, documenting how qualified candidates like him were systematically excluded from opportunities that could utilize their talents effectively. Tomorrow night, their paths would cross in ways that would change both their lives forever. The Meridian Tech Solutions building stood like a monument to Seattle's technological ambition against the midnight sky, its windows glowing with the harsh fluorescent light that marked the domain of night shift workers. Joseph pushed through the employee entrance at 11:52 p.m., 8 minutes before his scheduled start time, carrying a worn backpack containing his work clothes and the determination that had sustained him through 9 months of professional rejection. The night supervisor, a weathered man named Bill Harrison who seemed perpetually tired, handed him a security badge and a laminated sheet of instructions without making eye contact. Floors 3 through 7, executive suites and conference rooms. Supply closet is on level 2, break rooms on 4. Questions? "No, sir," Joseph replied, though he had dozens of questions about building security protocols, cleaning expectations, and whether anyone would notice if he worked efficiently enough to finish early and study job postings on his phone. What Joseph didn't know was that the quiet maintenance worker organizing supply carts in the corner was actually Alexander Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries, the parent company that had acquired Meridian Tech Solutions 7 months earlier. Disguised as Alex Martinez, complete with work boots, faded jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over weathered features, Alex had been conducting the most important investigation of his corporate career. For 4 weeks, Alex had been documenting workplace conditions from the perspective of the employees who kept his companies running after executives went home to their suburban estates. He'd witnessed conversations between night shift workers about choosing between medication and groceries, heard stories about qualified people trapped in survival jobs because corporate policies couldn't accommodate human complexity, observed the quiet dignity of workers who cleaned the offices of people who earned more in a week than they'd see all year. Tonight felt different. Alex had reviewed Joseph's employment application, a marketing professional with a bachelor's degree from University of Washington, 6 years of experience at Morrison & Associates, and recommendation letters that described him as, quote, innovative, analytically sharp, and exceptionally collaborative under pressure. Yet here he was, mopping floors at midnight because no company would hire someone who needed to leave work by 2:30 p.m. for child pickup. Joseph moved through the 7th floor executive offices with methodical precision, dusting desks where decisions were made about people like him. He cleaned around framed family photos of executives with their children at baseball games and piano recitals, wondering if these parents understood the privilege of careers that accommodated family responsibilities without question. Alex watched him work with growing fascination. Unlike other night shift workers who rushed through tasks to maximize break time, Joseph approached each responsibility with the same attention to detail he'd probably brought to marketing campaigns. He organized scattered documents without reading them, straightened office supplies with an efficiency expert's eye, and cleaned surfaces with thoroughness that suggested professional pride despite the circumstances. The break room on the 4th floor had become an unofficial gathering place for night staff during their 30-minute meal period. Joseph entered at 2:15 a.m. to find 3 other workers. Maria Santos, who cleaned the lower floors and spoke with a slight accent that suggested English was her second language. David Kim, a security guard who'd been working nights for 8 years while pursuing an engineering degree, and Patricia Williams, who handled data entry for the accounting department. "You're the new guy," Patricia observed, looking up from a container of leftover pasta. "How's your first week treating you?" "Learning the routine," Joseph replied, settling into a plastic chair with his sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, the same thing he'd packed for Ethan's school lunch. "Everyone seems pretty focused on their work." Maria nodded approvingly. "Night shift is different. Less drama, more getting things done. You have kids?" "One son, 8 years old." "That's why you're here. David said with understanding that came from experience. Day jobs don't work when you've got pickup times and doctor appointments. I've got 2 daughters, and the evening shift lets me handle their school stuff. Patricia leaned forward with interest. What did you do before this? Joseph hesitated, uncertain how much personal information to share with coworkers he'd just met. Marketing and communications work, but the schedules weren't compatible with single parenting. Corporate world, Maria said with a knowing expression, they want your soul, not just your labor. My husband and I both worked retail management before we had kids. Now he does days, I do nights, and we tag team parenting like wrestlers. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, revealing a community of workers who'd found creative solutions to impossible scheduling demands. David was 3 semesters away from his engineering degree, attending classes during afternoon hours when his daughters were in school. Patricia was supporting her elderly mother with dementia, while raising her teenage nephew. Maria and her husband had coordinated opposite shifts to avoid childcare costs they couldn't afford. The thing about night work, David explained, is that companies don't really see us. We're invisible. But that also means we understand how things actually work around here, not just how management thinks they work. Alex, seated at a corner table with his own modest dinner, listened to this conversation with growing awareness of perspectives he'd never considered during 15 years of corporate leadership. These weren't just employees who cleaned buildings and processed data. They were problem solvers who developed sophisticated strategies for managing complex life circumstances while maintaining professional excellence. After the break, Joseph returned to the executive floor where he encountered Alex restocking cleaning supplies in a utility closet. First week? Alex asked, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone accustomed to night shift conversations. Yeah, still figuring out the most efficient routes through these floors. Takes about 2 weeks to optimize your patterns, Alex replied. You worked in offices before? Joseph paused, uncertain how to answer. Different kind of office work. This is my first custodial position. Alex nodded without judgment. Career transition? Something like that. They worked in comfortable silence for several minutes, Joseph cleaning conference rooms while Alex organized supply cabinets with methodical efficiency. Alex found himself impressed by Joseph's instinctive attention to detail. He noticed which conference rooms had been used recently, based on subtle indicators like moved chairs and coffee rings, adjusted his cleaning approach accordingly, and left each space better organized than he'd found it. At 3:30 a.m., Alex witnessed a moment that would stay with him for months. Joseph's phone buzzed with a text message. Alex watched his entire demeanor shift as he read the screen, his professional composure giving way to paternal concern. The message was from Mrs. Kim. Joseph, Ethan woke up with bad dream about school, very upset asking for daddy, took 45 minutes to calm him down. He's sleeping now, but wanted you to know. Joseph stared at the message for several seconds, and Alex could see the internal struggle playing across his expression. The desire to call home and check on Ethan, versus the knowledge that waking his son again would likely trigger another anxiety episode. The guilt of being absent during a moment when Ethan needed comfort versus the reality that this job was their only source of income. Joseph typed back, "Thank you for taking such good care of him. I'll be home by 6:30 a.m. Give him extra hugs if he wakes up again." Alex watched Joseph return his phone to his pocket and resume cleaning with renewed focus, channeling his paternal anxiety into physical work. The dedication was remarkable. Most people would have made the phone call regardless of consequences, but Joseph understood that his son's sleep schedule was more important than his own emotional need for reassurance. The moment revealed character traits that Alex had rarely observed in corporate settings. Principled decision-making under pressure, genuine concern for others, well-being over personal comfort, and the ability to maintain professional focus despite intense personal stress. As their shifts ended at 6 a.m., Alex found himself walking toward the parking garage alongside Joseph, who moved with the quiet exhaustion of someone managing multiple demanding responsibilities. "Good first week," Alex said as they reached their vehicles. "Thanks, see you Monday." Driving home through Seattle's early morning traffic, Alex couldn't shake the image of Joseph's response to that text message. The gentle competence, the selfless prioritization of his child's needs, the ability to function professionally despite personal anxiety, these were exactly the leadership qualities that Alex's companies desperately needed, but rarely found in traditional candidates. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would change everything for both men, though neither yet understood the magnitude of transformation that was beginning to unfold. 3 weeks into his custodial work at Meridian Tech Solutions, Joseph had established a rhythm that balanced efficiency with thoroughness. He'd mapped the most logical cleaning routes through each floor, identified which executives generated the most paperwork clutter, and learned to anticipate the custodial supply needs that kept the building functioning smoothly. What he hadn't anticipated was how much the night shift community would come to rely on his problem-solving instincts. It started small. Maria Santos mentioned struggling with the new digital time-tracking system that had replaced the old punch cards, and Joseph spent 15 minutes during their break showing her shortcuts that streamlined the process. David Kim was having trouble with a statistics course that threatened his engineering degree timeline, so Joseph helped him understand regression analysis using marketing examples that made complex concepts accessible. Patricia Williams had been wrestling with the data reconciliation problem that was generating hours of overtime she couldn't afford to lose, and Joseph identified a formula error that had been corrupting her spreadsheets for months. Word spread quietly through the night shift that the new custodian had unusual analytical skills and genuine willingness to help colleagues solve problems. Alexander Morrison, still maintaining his Alex Martinez identity, watched these interactions with growing fascination. He'd spent 4 weeks documenting the untapped intellectual capacity of night shift workers. But Joseph's natural mentoring abilities represented something different. Instinctive leadership that emerged organically rather than being imposed through organizational hierarchy. On Tuesday evening, Joseph arrived for his shift to find the building's main elevator system malfunctioning, forcing custodial staff to carry heavy equipment up multiple flights of stairs. The facilities manager had left a terse note explaining that repair technicians wouldn't arrive until morning, essentially doubling the physical demands of an already challenging work schedule. While other workers grumbled about the inconvenience, Joseph quietly analyzed the situation and developed an alternative approach. He organized teams to transport supplies in strategic stages, minimizing trips while ensuring each floor received proper attention. He established a rotation system that prevented any individual from becoming overly fatigued and created temporary supply stations on alternating floors to reduce carrying distances. Alex observed this impromptu leadership demonstration with amazement. Joseph had identified a complex logistical problem, developed a practical solution, and implemented it through collaborative teamwork rather than authoritative demands. The entire night shift completed their assignments on schedule despite significant obstacles, and Joseph had orchestrated the success without anyone feeling managed or controlled. "Where did you learn to coordinate teams like that?" Alex asked during their 2:30 a.m. break. Joseph looked up from his sandwich, surprised by the question. "I guess when you're managing a child with special needs, you develop systems thinking. Everything affects everything else, so you learn to anticipate problems and create backup plans." "Special needs?" "My son has ADHD and sensory processing issues. Doctor appointments, therapy sessions, school meetings. They all have to coordinate perfectly or the whole day falls apart. After a while, you start seeing patterns and inefficiencies everywhere." Alex nodded thoughtfully. "That's sophisticated project management experience." Joseph shrugged. "It's just survival. When you can't afford for things to go wrong, you get good at making sure they don't." The conversation was interrupted by Maria rushing into the break room with obvious distress. "Joseph, I need help. The executive conference room on 7. I spilled cleaning solution on some papers, and I think they might be important documents." Joseph immediately stood up. "Show me what happened." They hurried to the 7th floor, where Maria led him to a conference table covered with financial reports and strategic planning documents. A small puddle of cleaning solution had soaked through several pages, smearing ink and creating potential legal liability if the documents contained confidential information. Joseph quickly assessed the situation. "These look like quarterly budget projections. Do you know if they're original copies or printouts?" "I don't know," Maria said, her voice tight with anxiety. "If I damaged something important, they could fire me. I can't lose this job." Joseph studied the documents carefully, noting watermarks and formatting that suggested they were printed copies rather than original contracts. These appear to be draft printouts for internal review. The real concern is whether the information is confidential. He photographed the affected pages with his phone, then used paper towels to carefully absorb the cleaning solution while preserving as much text as possible. Working with methodical precision, he separated damaged pages from clean ones and organized everything by document type and apparent importance. "Here's what we're going to do," Joseph explained to Maria. I'll write a detailed incident report explaining exactly what happened, what steps we took to minimize damage, and what documents were affected. We'll submit it to the facilities manager with the photos as documentation. This shows professionalism and accountability rather than trying to hide the accident. Alex, who had followed them to observe the situation, watched Joseph transform a potential crisis into a manageable administrative issue. His approach demonstrated crisis communication skills, attention to detail, and genuine concern for a colleague's employment security. Over the next hour, Joseph helped Maria draft a comprehensive incident report that explained the accident in clear, professional language while emphasizing the immediate steps taken to preserve document integrity. He included suggestions for preventing similar incidents and offered to participate in any necessary follow-up discussions. "You didn't have to do all this," Maria said as they finished the report. "Yes, I did," Joseph replied simply. "We're a team. When someone on the team has a problem, we solve it together." The following evening, Joseph learned that Maria's incident report had been received positively by management, who praised her transparency and the professional handling of an unfortunate accident. No disciplinary action was taken, and the facilities department implemented Joseph's suggested protocol for handling confidential documents during cleaning operations. Word of Joseph's intervention spread through the night shift community, cementing his reputation as someone who combined analytical skills with genuine care for colleagues. Workers began approaching him with various challenges, from technology problems to scheduling conflicts to personal financial dilemmas, trusting that he would offer practical solutions without judgment. Alex found himself increasingly impressed by Joseph's natural ability to build collaborative relationships across diverse groups. Unlike traditional managers who relied on positional authority to influence behavior, Joseph earned respect through competence and authentic concern for others' welfare. On Friday night, the moment arrived that would change everything. Joseph's phone rang at 1:45 a.m. while he was restocking supplies in the fifth-floor supply closet. He glanced at the screen and immediately answered with paternal concern. "Mrs. Kim, is everything okay?" Alex, working nearby, could hear the elderly woman's voice through the phone, speaking with urgent worry that carried across the quiet hallway. "Joseph, I'm so sorry to call, but Ethan is having a very bad night. He's running a fever of 102 degrees, and he's asking for you. He's crying and saying his head hurts, and I don't know what to do." Alex watched Joseph's face cycle through emotions, paternal panic, professional obligation, desperate calculation of options that all seemed impossible. This was the moment that would reveal the true depth of Joseph's character and force Alex to confront uncomfortable truths about the society that systematically failed people like him. The decision Joseph made next would not only change his own life but send shockwaves through an entire corporate empire, proving that authentic leadership could emerge from the most unexpected places. Joseph's grip tightened on his phone as Mrs. Kim's worried voice continued through the speaker. "He threw up twice, and he's shaking. I gave him children's Tylenol like you showed me. But his fever isn't coming down. He keeps asking when Daddy is coming home." Alexander Morrison stepped closer, pretending to organize cleaning supplies while actually witnessing the most authentic display of crisis management he'd observed in 15 years of corporate leadership. Joseph's transformation was immediate and complete, from night custodian to devoted father analyzing a complex emergency situation. "Mrs. Kim, I need you to check his temperature again in exactly 10 minutes. If it's still above 101.8, we're going to the emergency room. Can you keep him hydrated with small sips of water?" "Yes, but Joseph, he's asking for you. He said his stomach hurts and his head feels fuzzy. This isn't like his usual episodes." Joseph closed his eyes, and Alex could see the internal battle playing out across his expression. The mathematical calculation was brutal. Leaving work 3 hours early meant losing pay they desperately needed and potentially jeopardizing the only job that accommodated his constraints. But Ethan's health trumped every other consideration. "I'm coming home now," Joseph said, his voice steady despite the visible anxiety. "Keep him comfortable and cool. If anything changes, if his fever spikes or he becomes unresponsive, call 911 immediately. I'll be there in 30 minutes." After ending the call, Joseph stood motionless for exactly 15 seconds, allowing himself a moment to process the magnitude of what he was about to do. Alex watched him straighten his shoulders, gather his cleaning supplies with efficient movements, and prepare to walk away from income his family couldn't afford to lose. "Everything okay?" Alex asked, though the answer was obvious. My son is sick. I need to leave early tonight." "How early?" Joseph checked his watch. 3 hours before my shift ends. I know it's not professional, and I'll understand if there are consequences, but I don't have other options." Alex nodded slowly. Family comes first. "Thank you for understanding." Joseph walked purposefully toward the supervisor's office to report his early departure, knowing this conversation could end his employment before his first month was complete. Alex followed at a discreet distance, curious about how night shift management would respond to an employee choosing family responsibility over workplace obligation. Bill Harrison looked up from his paperwork with the weary expression of someone accustomed to staffing complications. "Problem, Scott?" "My son has a high fever and needs medical attention. I have to leave immediately." "I know this affects tonight's coverage, and I take full responsibility for any scheduling issues this creates." Bill studied Joseph's face, noting the genuine distress mixed with professional accountability. "This gonna be a regular thing?" "No, sir. I have reliable childcare, but medical emergencies require parental response. I'll make up the missed hours over weekend shifts if that's possible." "Don't worry about the hours. Get your kid taken care of." Joseph blinked in surprise. "Thank you, sir. I've got 3 kids myself. Sometimes they need their dad more than the company needs another clean conference room." As Joseph hurried toward the exit, Alex found himself deeply moved by the exchange. Bill Harrison's understanding response suggested that night shift management operated with more human compassion than most corporate environments, recognizing that employees were complete people rather than interchangeable resources. Alex made a quick decision that would accelerate his investigation timeline. He approached Bill Harrison's office with a casual demeanor that masked his intense interest in learning more about Joseph's background and character. "That new guy seems pretty responsible," Alex observed. Bill looked up from his reports. "Scott? Yeah, he's solid. Professional attitude, good work ethic. Not like some people who treat this job like a temporary inconvenience." "You don't mind him leaving early?" "Kid's got a sick child." "What kind of manager would I be if I punished someone for being a good father?" Bill paused thoughtfully. "Besides, Scott's been here 3 weeks and hasn't missed a single shift, shows up early every night, and actually improves whatever area he's assigned to. That kind of reliability earns some flexibility." Alex nodded appreciatively. "Sounds like quality employee." "Better than quality. Guy's got management potential if he ever gets the opportunity. Watches how systems work, suggests improvements, helps other workers solve problems. Last week he reorganized our supply ordering process and probably saved us 2 hours per shift." This information aligned perfectly with Alex's observations, confirming that Joseph's leadership capabilities were being recognized even in his current role. The night shift supervisor had identified exactly the qualities that traditional corporate hiring processes consistently overlooked. Meanwhile, Joseph drove through Seattle's empty streets with controlled urgency, his mind racing through medical protocols he'd memorized during Ethan's previous health scares. High fever could indicate simple viral infection or something more serious requiring immediate intervention. His pediatric emergency training, acquired through necessity rather than formal education, kicked in automatically. At their apartment, Mrs. Kim met him at the door with relief evident in her expression. "His temperature is 101.9, and the Tylenol seems to be helping. He's more alert now, asking about you." Joseph found Ethan curled up on the couch, pale but conscious, clutching his weighted dinosaur while watching cartoons with the sound turned low. The sight of his father brought immediate comfort to the 8-year-old's frightened eyes. "Hey buddy, how are you feeling?" "My tummy hurts, and my head feels weird. Are you going to take me to the hospital?" Joseph sat beside his son, automatically assessing symptoms with the expertise of someone who'd navigated multiple medical emergencies. Ethan's skin felt warm but not dangerously hot, his breathing was normal, and his responses indicated cognitive clarity despite discomfort. "We're going to the urgent care clinic. They have special doctors who help kids feel better when they're sick. Will you stay with me the whole time?" "Every single minute." The urgent care visit lasted 4 hours, during which Joseph demonstrated the patient advocacy skills he'd developed through years of navigating medical systems on Ethan's behalf. He provided detailed symptom histories, asked informed questions about treatment options, and ensured his son remained calm during examination procedures that could overwhelm children with sensory processing challenges. Dr. Jennifer Chen, the attending physician, was impressed by Joseph's thorough documentation of Ethan's symptoms and his sophisticated understanding of his child's medical needs. "You've provided exceptionally detailed information. Are you in healthcare?" "No, just experienced with pediatric emergencies. Ethan has ADHD and sensory processing issues, so I've learned to track symptoms carefully. Your preparation made our diagnostic process much more efficient. Ethan has a viral infection that should resolve with rest and fluids, but your quick response prevented potential complications." Driving home at sunrise, Joseph reflected on the night's events with mixed emotions. Ethan was recovering well, but leaving work early had cost them desperately needed income and potentially damaged his professional reputation. The impossible mathematics of single parenthood continued to force choices between financial survival and family welfare. What Joseph didn't know was that Alexander Morrison had spent the remainder of the night researching his background, verifying his professional qualifications, and developing a plan that would transform not just Joseph's life, but the entire approach to employee management across Morrison Industries. The sacrifice Joseph had made for his son's health had revealed character traits that no interview process could assess and no resume could document. His crisis management skills, emotional intelligence, and principled decision-making under pressure represented exactly the leadership qualities that Alex's companies desperately needed but rarely found in traditional candidates. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would change both their lives forever. Alexander Morrison couldn't stop thinking about Joseph Scott. For 3 days since witnessing that midnight medical emergency, he'd found himself distracted during board meetings, questioning fundamental assumptions about corporate hiring practices, and wrestling with uncomfortable truths about the company he'd built over 12 years of aggressive acquisition and optimization strategies. The traditional metrics that had guided his business philosophy, quarterly profit margins, operational efficiency, cost per employee ratios, suddenly felt incomplete when measured against what he'd observed in that supply closet at 1:45 a.m. Joseph's crisis management during Ethan's medical emergency had demonstrated leadership capabilities that no MBA program could teach, yet he was cleaning offices because corporate America couldn't accommodate the reality of his life as a devoted single father. The contradiction was keeping Alex awake at night. On Wednesday morning, he made a decision that violated every conventional business protocol he'd followed throughout his career. Instead of accepting standard HR recommendations and moving forward with traditional hiring processes, Alex instructed his private investigator to conduct a comprehensive background check on Joseph Scott, not to uncover problems, but to understand the full scope of his capabilities and character. "I want to know everything," Alex told Marcus Rodriguez, a former FBI agent who specialized in executive security investigations. Educational background, employment history, community involvement, references from neighbors, teachers, therapists, anyone who's observed his decision-making and interpersonal skills. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Sir, this level of investigation is typically reserved for C-suite executive candidates. Are you considering him for senior leadership?" Alex paused, realizing he didn't have a clear answer. "I'm considering him for something important, but I'm not sure what yet. Just get me a complete picture of who he is when nobody's watching." The investigation took 4 days and produced a 52-page report that read like a case study in unrecognized excellence. Marcus had interviewed Joseph's former colleagues at Morrison & Associates, Ethan's teachers and therapists, neighbors from their apartment building, and volunteers at organizations where he'd contributed time despite his overwhelming personal circumstances. The pattern that emerged was remarkable in its consistency. Dr. Kevin Davis, Ethan's behavioral therapist. "Joseph approaches his son's treatment with the same strategic thinking I see in corporate consultants. He tracks progress meticulously, identifies patterns other parents miss, and develops creative solutions to behavioral challenges. He's also become an informal mentor to other parents, navigating ADHD support services. I regularly refer families to him because he explains complex therapeutic concepts better than most professionals." Rebecca Martinez, his former supervisor at Morrison & Associates. "Joseph was our most reliable project coordinator, especially during crisis situations. He had an intuitive ability to identify potential problems before they escalated and communicate solutions in ways that brought teams together rather than creating blame. His resignation after his wife's death was a significant loss to our organization." Mrs. Kim, his neighbor. Joseph works nights and manages his son's complex medical needs, but he still finds time to help elderly residents with technology problems, translate for families who don't speak English, and organize community response during emergencies. Last month, when the Patel family had their apartment fire, Joseph coordinated meal donations and temporary housing without being asked. Ms. Rodriguez, Ethan's teacher, Joseph has transformed our school's approach to parent communication. He helped us develop clearer information packets for families, suggested modifications to our IEP meeting format that reduced confusion, and created a peer support network for parents of special needs children. He does this volunteer work while managing his own overwhelming schedule. The report documented a pattern of authentic leadership that transcended job titles or organizational charts. Joseph consistently identified systemic problems, developed practical solutions, and implemented changes that benefited entire communities. More importantly, he did this work without seeking recognition or compensation, suggesting character traits that couldn't be manufactured through corporate training programs. Alex found himself reading the report multiple times, comparing Joseph's demonstrated capabilities against the leadership challenges facing Meridian Tech Solutions. Employee satisfaction surveys consistently showed problems with communication, process efficiency, and workplace culture, exactly the areas where Joseph had proven expertise. On Friday afternoon, Alex made another unprecedented decision. He called Dr. Sarah Chen, an organizational psychology consultant who specialized in innovative hiring practices for Fortune 500 companies. "Sarah, I need your perspective on something unusual. What if traditional interview processes systematically exclude the most qualified candidates for leadership positions?" Dr. Chen had worked with Alex for 5 years and was accustomed to unconventional questions. "That's an interesting hypothesis. What evidence are you seeing?" Alex described his undercover investigation without revealing specific names or details. "I've identified someone whose demonstrated leadership capabilities are exceptional, but he's been rejected by dozens of companies because his personal circumstances don't fit traditional availability requirements." How are you measuring leadership capabilities? Crisis management under pressure, innovative problem solving, ability to build collaborative relationships across diverse groups, consistent ethical decision-making, and authentic concern for community welfare. Those are exactly the qualities most companies claim to want but rarely know how to identify. Traditional interviews assess cultural fit and credential matching, not authentic leadership potential. Alex leaned forward in his chair. "What would you recommend for evaluating unconventional candidates?" Focus on behavioral evidence rather than interview performance. Look at how they've handled real challenges in their personal and professional lives. Examine their community involvement and voluntary leadership roles. Most importantly, observe their decision-making when they think nobody's watching. The conversation continued for an hour, with Dr. Chen explaining how companies could redesign hiring processes to identify authentic leadership rather than polished interviewing skills. Alex took detailed notes, already formulating a plan that would test his emerging theories about human potential and corporate hiring practices. That evening, Alex returned to Meridian Tech Solutions for another night shift as Alex Martinez, wanting to observe Joseph's work and gather additional perspective on his capabilities. The building felt different knowing that the modest custodian working methodically through executive offices possessed leadership qualities that could transform entire organizations. Joseph was training a new night shift worker, Maria's replacement, after she'd been promoted to day shift coordination following her professional handling of the document incident. Alex watched Joseph explain building protocols with patience and clarity, demonstrating the same mentoring abilities he'd observed over the past month. "The key is understanding each executive's work patterns," Joseph explained to the new employee. "Mr. Blackwell always leaves client presentations scattered across his conference table, but they're usually organized in chronological order. Ms. Patterson keeps sensitive documents in specific filing systems. Learning these patterns helps you clean efficiently while respecting their workflow." Alex marveled at Joseph's sophisticated understanding of workplace dynamics and his ability to train others without condescension or impatience. He'd transformed a basic custodial position into a strategic support role that enhanced executive productivity while building positive relationships across organizational levels. During their 2:30 a.m. break, Alex initiated a conversation that would begin revealing his true identity and intentions. "Joseph, you mentioned having marketing experience. What made you transition to night shift work?" Joseph looked up from his coffee, considering how much personal information to share. Single parenting requires schedule flexibility that most marketing positions don't offer. This work happens while my son sleeps, so I can handle his school and therapy needs during the day. That's significant career sacrifice for family priorities. Not sacrifice, Joseph corrected gently. Different path. Being Ethan's father is the most important work I'll ever do. Everything else is just how I fund that responsibility. Alex found himself moved by Joseph's reframing of career versus family as complementary rather than competing priorities. This perspective represented exactly the kind of thinking that could revolutionize corporate culture if applied systematically across large organizations. What if there were professional opportunities that accommodated family responsibilities while utilizing your full capabilities? Joseph smiled with weary skepticism. That would be nice, but corporate America hasn't evolved that far yet. Most companies want dedication that looks like sacrificing everything else for work advancement. Maybe some companies are starting to recognize that supporting employees' complete lives generates better business results. Maybe, Joseph agreed, though his tone suggested polite doubt rather than genuine optimism. As their conversation ended and they returned to work, Alex finalized his decision. Tomorrow he would begin the most revolutionary hiring decision of his career, one that would either validate his emerging philosophy about human potential or confirm that idealism couldn't survive contact with business realities. The quiet revolution in corporate hiring practices was about to become very loud indeed. Monday morning arrived with an email that made Joseph's stomach clench with familiar anxiety despite 7 weeks of stable custodial employment. The subject line from Meridian Tech Solutions Human Resources read, "Immediate meeting required, personnel review." Corporate language like this typically preceded layoffs, performance issues, or policy violations that could terminate his employment without warning. Joseph sat at his small kitchen table at 10:30 a.m., reviewing the message while Ethan worked on homework at the counter. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. with senior management to discuss your current position and potential opportunities within the organization. The phrase potential opportunities felt particularly ominous. Corporate speak for restructuring that usually meant elimination of positions deemed non-essential. His mind raced through possible explanations. Had someone complained about his early departure during Ethan's medical emergency? Was management implementing cost-cutting measures that would eliminate night shift positions? Had his background in marketing somehow created concerns about overqualification or flight risk? "Dad, you have your worried face," Ethan observed, looking up from his math worksheet with the perceptive attention he brought to reading adult emotions. "Just thinking about work things, buddy. Nothing for you to worry about." But Ethan's sensitivity to his father's emotional state had been heightened by months of observing Joseph's stress levels fluctuate with job prospects and financial pressures. "Is it about the meeting you have to go to?" Joseph paused, surprised that Ethan had been listening to his phone conversation with Mrs. Kim about afternoon schedule adjustments. Sometimes grown-ups have meetings to talk about work stuff. It's probably just routine. But you're scared they might fire you. The directness of Ethan's observation pierced through Joseph's attempt to maintain parental composure. His 8-year-old son had developed sophisticated awareness of their precarious financial situation and the constant threat of job loss that hung over their daily lives. "I'm not scared, buddy. I'm prepared for whatever happens. And no matter what, we'll figure out what comes next together." Ethan nodded solemnly, returning to his homework with the resilient acceptance that characterized children who'd learned to adapt to uncertainty. Joseph felt the familiar weight of responsibility, protecting his son's emotional security while navigating professional instability that could affect their basic survival. At 1:45 p.m., Joseph walked through the Meridian Tech Solutions lobby in his best interview attire, the same navy blazer and gray slacks that had survived multiple job searches. The building felt different during daylight hours, bustling with the energy of software engineers, project managers, and executives whose work happened in climate-controlled offices rather than empty corridors after midnight. The receptionist directed him to conference room C on the executive floor, where he'd cleaned windows and emptied trash cans just 16 hours earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was about to be evaluated as an employee in the same space where he'd worked invisibly as custodial staff. Joseph entered the conference room to find an unusual assembly that immediately elevated his anxiety. Patricia Wells, the Human Resources Director, sat at the head of a polished mahogany table flanked by 2 people he didn't recognize. a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair who carried herself with obvious authority, and a man whose expensive suit suggested senior executive status. Most surprising was the presence of Bill Harrison, his night shift supervisor, who seemed as puzzled as Joseph about being included in what appeared to be a high-level personnel meeting. "Joseph, thank you for coming in," Patricia began. "Before we discuss today's agenda, I want to acknowledge the excellent work you've done since joining our custodial team. Your professionalism and collaborative approach have been noted by multiple departments." The praise felt genuine but also felt like preparation for disappointing news. Joseph had learned to read corporate communication patterns, and effusive recognition often preceded difficult conversations about restructuring or policy changes. "However," Patricia continued, "we've received recommendations from Morrison Industries leadership that require us to explore alternative employment arrangements that might better utilize your background and capabilities." Joseph frowned, trying to process language that seemed positive but felt disconnected from his expectations about potential termination. Morrison Industries was the parent company that had acquired Meridian 8 months earlier, but he'd never had direct contact with their management team. The steel-haired woman opened a leather portfolio and began reading from what appeared to be prepared remarks. "Mr. Scott, my name is Catherine Walsh, Chief Operating Officer for Morrison Industries. Based on comprehensive evaluation of your professional background and observed performance, we're offering you a position as Director of Employee Engagement and Process Improvement." The words didn't make sense. Joseph had been expecting termination, not promotion, to a position that sounded like it belonged to someone with decades of corporate experience and advanced degrees in organizational psychology. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Joseph asked, convinced he'd misheard something crucial. The man in the expensive suit stood up, and his voice carried authority that seemed oddly familiar despite Joseph's certainty they'd never met. "Joseph, my name is Alexander Morrison. I'm the CEO of Morrison Industries, and for the past 5 weeks, I've been working undercover as a maintenance employee to understand how our companies actually function from the perspective of frontline workers." The room seemed to tilt as Joseph processed this revelation. The maintenance worker he'd known as Alex Martinez, who had asked thoughtful questions about his background and observed his work with genuine interest, was actually the billionaire CEO of the parent company that owned Meridian Tech Solutions. Joseph struggled to form coherent words. I've been documenting your approach to crisis management, team leadership, and process improvement," Alexander continued. "What you've accomplished in 7 weeks represents exactly the kind of innovation that corporate America desperately needs but rarely recognizes. Your methodologies for identifying systemic problems and implementing collaborative solutions have generated results that traditional management consulting firms charge millions to achieve." Joseph felt overwhelming disorientation as he tried to reconcile the maintenance worker he'd known with the corporate executive standing before him. "How long have you been watching?" "Since your first week, when I witnessed you reorganize our supply management system and mentor struggling colleagues with patience that impressed me more than any leadership presentation I've seen in 12 years of business management." The memory of those early conversations discussing work-life balance and employee treatment suddenly took on completely different significance. Alexander Morrison had been evaluating his character and capabilities, while Joseph thought he was simply making friendly conversation with a fellow night shift worker. "The position offer is real," Alexander continued. "Morrison Industries needs someone who understands that treating employees as complete human beings generates better business results than treating them as interchangeable resources. Your work here has proven that authentic leadership can emerge from the most unexpected places." Joseph looked around the conference room at faces that seemed to be waiting for his response to an opportunity that felt surreal. 7 weeks ago, he'd been desperate for any employment that could cover rent and basic expenses. Now the CEO of a major corporation was offering him a director-level position based on custodial work performance. "What about Ethan?" Joseph asked. The question that had determined every professional decision he'd made since Sarah's departure. "The position includes full benefits, a salary of $420,000 annually, and scheduling flexibility designed around your family responsibilities," Alexander replied. "Morrison Industries is committed to proving that supporting employees' personal priorities enhances rather than hinders their professional contributions." Joseph felt tears welling up as the magnitude of this offer began to register. The salary alone would provide financial security he'd never imagined possible. Combined with the opportunity to influence workplace policies across a major corporation, The position represented a chance to create systematic change that could benefit thousands of families facing challenges similar to his own. "I need to ask," Joseph said, his voice steady despite the emotion overwhelming his system. "Is this because you feel sorry for my situation, or because you believe I can actually do this work?" Alexander smiled with what appeared to be genuine respect. "Joseph, I've spent 5 weeks documenting your decision-making, problem-solving, and leadership capabilities. This offer is based on demonstrated excellence, not charitable impulses. Morrison Industries needs authentic leaders who can transform workplace culture through human-centered approaches. You've proven that you possess exactly those capabilities." The revolution that had begun with a single father's midnight crisis management was about to reshape corporate America's understanding of where exceptional leadership could be found and how it could be developed. Joseph's acceptance of the director position came with immediate implementation challenges that tested every leadership principle he developed through years of crisis management and single parenting. Within 48 hours of signing his employment contract, he found himself coordinating with department heads across 6 Morrison Industries subsidiaries, analyzing employee satisfaction data that painted a troubling picture of workplace dysfunction, and designing intervention strategies that could affect over 47,000 workers. The scope was overwhelming, but the methodology was familiar. Joseph approached corporate culture transformation with the same systematic thinking he'd applied to managing Ethan's complex needs, identifying patterns, developing sustainable solutions, and implementing changes gradually to avoid overwhelming existing systems. His first week as Director of Employee Engagement revealed problems that extended far beyond simple communication gaps. Morrison Industries had acquired multiple companies over the past 3 years, each with distinct workplace cultures, management philosophies, and employee expectations. The integration process had focused exclusively on financial consolidation while ignoring human factors that determined operational success. At Cascade Manufacturing in Portland, employee turnover had reached 340% annually, with exit interviews consistently citing inflexible scheduling and management indifference to work-life balance concerns. Pacific Software Solutions in San Francisco reported productivity declines of 23% since acquisition, with talented developers leaving for competitors who offered remote work options and family-friendly policies. Northwest Logistics in Spokane had experienced 2 walkouts in 6 months, with warehouse workers protesting unsafe conditions and supervisory practices that treated employees as expendable resources rather than valuable team members. The pattern was clear. Morrison Industries had prioritized short-term cost reduction over sustainable workforce development, creating environments that systematically drove away capable people. Joseph's initial assessment took 3 weeks and produced a comprehensive report that challenged fundamental assumptions about employee management. Working 18-hour days while maintaining his commitment to Ethan's school pickup and evening routine, he documented specific interventions that could address each subsidiary's unique challenges while implementing company-wide policies that supported human dignity. "The core problem isn't employee performance," Joseph explained during his first presentation to Morrison Industries' executive board. "It's management systems that treat workers as interchangeable parts rather than strategic assets with individual circumstances that affect their contribution potential." Alexander Morrison sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by 12 vice presidents who represented various aspects of the corporate portfolio. Several executives looked skeptical about receiving workplace advice from someone who'd been emptying their trash cans 2 months earlier. But Alexander's obvious confidence in Joseph's capabilities commanded respectful attention. "Give us specific examples," requested CFO Michael Chen, a man whose cost-cutting focus had driven many of the policies that Joseph was now tasked with reforming. Joseph displayed a series of charts that translated human dignity into financial metrics. "At Cascade Manufacturing, we're losing $2.3 million annually in recruitment and training costs because inflexible scheduling drives away experienced workers. Implementing flexible shift arrangements and emergency leave policies could reduce turnover by 60% while improving product quality through workforce stability." Catherine Walsh, the COO, who had initially been skeptical of employee-centered approaches, leaned forward with obvious interest. "What about productivity impacts?" "Flexible scheduling sounds expensive." "Actually, it generates cost savings," Joseph replied, switching to data that surprised several executives. Pacific Software Solutions analyzed productivity metrics for their remote work pilot program. Developers working flexible schedules delivered 31% more completed projects while reporting significantly higher job satisfaction. The key is measuring results rather than hours logged. The presentation continued for 90 minutes, with Joseph addressing concerns about implementation costs, supervisory challenges, and potential abuse of flexible policies. His responses demonstrated sophisticated understanding of business operations combined with practical experience managing complex scheduling demands. The most important factor is changing managerial mindset from control-based supervision to results-based leadership, Joseph explained. Employees who feel trusted and supported contribute innovative solutions that fixed-schedule workers can't provide. When people aren't worried about choosing between family emergencies and employment security, they invest more creative energy in problem-solving. VP of Operations Sarah Martinez raised a concern that several executives had been considering. Joseph, this all sounds idealistic, but how do we prevent employees from taking advantage of flexible policies? Some people will inevitably abuse accommodation arrangements. Joseph smiled, having anticipated this question based on his experience with corporate resistance to human-centered policies. The same way we prevent any workplace policy abuse, through clear expectations, consistent accountability, and performance-based evaluation. The difference is that we're measuring contribution rather than compliance. He displayed comparative data from companies that had successfully implemented family-friendly policies. Organizations with flexible work arrangements report higher employee engagement, lower absenteeism, and significantly better customer satisfaction scores. When workers feel supported in their complete lives, they deliver superior professional performance. The board meeting concluded with unanimous approval for Joseph's pilot program, which would implement flexible scheduling and emergency leave policies across 3 Morrison Industries subsidiaries over 6 months. Success metrics would include employee retention rates, productivity measurements, and cost-benefit analysis that could justify expanding the program company-wide. Joseph's second month as director brought the challenge of implementation across diverse organizational cultures. At Cascade Manufacturing, he worked with production supervisors to develop rotating shift systems that accommodated workers' childcare schedules while maintaining manufacturing quotas. The key insight was recognizing that employees understood operational requirements better than management realized. They just needed systematic opportunities to share their knowledge. Maria Santos, his former night shift colleague who had been promoted to day coordination, became an invaluable liaison for implementing changes at Meridian Tech Solutions. Her credibility with frontline workers and understanding of practical challenges helped Joseph design policies that addressed real needs rather than theoretical problems. The night shift workers are talking about the changes, Maria reported during one of their weekly planning meetings. People are actually excited about coming to work because they know someone is listening to their ideas and implementing their suggestions. At Pacific Software Solutions, Joseph established cross-functional teams that included developers, project managers, and support staff in strategic planning discussions. The innovation was remarkable. Technical solutions emerged from collaborative brainstorming that would never have developed through traditional top-down management approaches. The most significant breakthrough came at Northwest Logistics, where Joseph implemented safety committees that gave warehouse workers direct input into operational procedures. Within 30 days, workplace injuries decreased by 45%, while productivity increased through process improvements that workers had been recommending for years. People have been telling us how to fix these problems all along, observed David Kim, Joseph's former security colleague who had been promoted to facilities coordination. The difference is that now management is actually listening and implementing our suggestions instead of dismissing them. By the end of his second month, Joseph had documented measurable improvements across all pilot locations. Employee satisfaction surveys showed increases ranging from 34% to 67%, depending on the specific workplace culture and implemented changes. More importantly, productivity metrics improved consistently, proving that supporting workers' human needs generated superior business results. Alexander Morrison reviewed Joseph's progress reports with growing amazement at the speed and scope of positive transformation. The man who had cleaned office buildings at midnight was systematically revolutionizing corporate culture across a major industrial portfolio, proving that authentic leadership could indeed emerge from the most unexpected places. The revolution that had begun with a single father's crisis management skills was reshaping how American businesses understood the relationship between employee satisfaction and organizational success. 2 years later, Joseph Scott stood before a packed auditorium at Stanford Business School, delivering the keynote address to 950 MBA students who represented the future of corporate leadership. The man who had once cleaned these types of lecture halls at midnight now commanded attention from some of the brightest business minds in America, sharing insights that challenged every traditional assumption about human potential and workplace excellence. The most transformative leadership moment of my career happened at 1:45 a.m. in a supply closet. When my 8-year-old son called during a medical emergency, Joseph began, his voice carrying the confidence that came from knowing his story had already changed hundreds of thousands of lives. That phone call taught me more about crisis management, resource allocation, and stakeholder communication than any business school curriculum could provide. The audience listened with rapt attention as Joseph described his journey from desperate job seeker to Director of Employee Engagement for Morrison Industries, a role that had revolutionized workplace culture across 47 companies employing 164,000 workers. But more importantly, his methodologies had influenced corporate policies throughout American business, creating a ripple effect that benefited millions of families. In the front row sat Alexander Morrison, whose undercover investigation had sparked the transformation that business publications now called the Scott Revolution. His decision to promote a single father from night custodian to corporate executive had generated results that exceeded his most optimistic projections and established Morrison Industries as the most sought-after employer in multiple industries. Employee satisfaction across our portfolio has increased by 52% since implementing family-centered policies, Joseph continued, displaying charts that translated human dignity into impressive financial metrics. Retention rates have improved by 43%, saving approximately $280 million annually in recruitment and training costs. Most significantly, innovation metrics show that employees who feel supported in their personal lives contribute 28% more creative solutions to business challenges. The Stanford students took detailed notes, recognizing that Joseph's approaches represented the future of successful corporate leadership. Traditional command and control management styles were being replaced by collaborative methodologies that recognized employees as complete human beings rather than interchangeable resources. After his presentation, Joseph was approached by Dr. Maria Gonzalez, Stanford's Dean of Executive Education, who had been tracking the business impact of family-friendly workplace policies across Fortune 500 companies. Joseph, your results are reshaping how business schools teach organizational behavior. Would you consider developing a curriculum that could train the next generation of leaders in human-centered management approaches? Joseph smiled, thinking about how different his life might have been if corporate recruiters had learned these principles years earlier. I'd be honored to contribute, but I want to ensure the curriculum includes perspectives from working parents, caregivers, and employees whose life circumstances don't fit traditional corporate expectations. That evening, Joseph returned to his home in Bellevue, a comfortable 4-bedroom house with a backyard where Ethan could practice soccer and a home office where he conducted video conferences with executives across multiple time zones. The house represented security without ostentation, stability that allowed both father and son to pursue their goals without financial anxiety. Ethan, now 10 years old and thriving in a specialized program that supported his academic and social development, was completing homework at the kitchen island when Joseph arrived. His communication skills had flourished with consistent therapy and a stable environment, and he'd recently been selected for his school's accelerated mathematics program. "How was your speech, Dad?" Ethan asked, looking up from a science project about renewable energy systems. "It went very well, buddy. I talked about how you helped me become better at my job." "By having ADHD?" Ethan asked with the direct curiosity that characterized his approach to understanding complex topics. Joseph sat down beside his son, marveling at his ability to identify the essential elements of complicated situations. "By teaching me that people's differences can be their greatest strengths when they receive proper support. You helped me understand that companies work better when they accommodate everyone's needs rather than expecting everyone to be the same." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Like how my school has quiet spaces and movement breaks that help me focus, but they also help other kids who aren't ADHD." Exactly like that. When we design environments around people's real needs rather than theoretical expectations, everyone benefits. Mrs. Kim, now 84 but still energetic, knocked on the kitchen door and entered with a covered dish that smelled like her famous Korean stew. She had become Ethan's official grandmother and Joseph's closest confidant, witnessing their transformation from desperate survival to meaningful contribution. "Joseph, I saw you on the news tonight. They said your speech is going to be shown to business students all over the country. Joseph felt a mixture of pride and responsibility as he considered the influence his story would have on future corporate leaders. Mrs. Kim, sometimes I can't believe how much our lives have changed since that terrible time when I couldn't find work. I can believe it, Mrs. Kim replied firmly. You always had the heart and the mind for important work. You just needed someone wise enough to recognize your value. That weekend, Joseph and Ethan visited Meridian Tech Solutions, where he maintained an office and continued mentoring the employee engagement initiatives that had launched his career. The building looked the same from the outside, but the workplace culture had been transformed beyond recognition. The employee suggestion system that had once been ignored now featured digital platforms, regular listening sessions, and systematic implementation of worker-identified improvements. The wellness program Joseph had established had evolved into a comprehensive support center with resources for stress management, continuing education, and peer support networks. Most importantly, Meridian had become a model for family-friendly employment practices that attracted talented people from across the Pacific Northwest. The company's reputation for supporting working parents, accommodating caregiving responsibilities, and recognizing the full humanity of their workforce had made it an employer of choice for professionals seeking workplaces that honored their complete lives. Bill Harrison, the former night shift supervisor who had been promoted to operations manager, greeted Joseph with warm enthusiasm. Joseph, the new employee orientation program you designed is working beautifully. New hires consistently say they've never experienced workplace training that addresses both professional development and personal wellness. As Joseph walked through spaces where he had once moved invisibly, he encountered dozens of employees whose lives had been improved by policies that recognized workers as whole human beings rather than production units. Single mothers who could participate in school events without jeopardizing their careers. Employees pursuing education who received scheduling flexibility and tuition support. Workers managing elderly care responsibilities who found understanding rather than discrimination. The revolution that had begun with Joseph's desperate job search had proven definitively that treating employees well generated superior business results while creating competitive advantages that traditional management approaches couldn't match. That evening, as Joseph helped Ethan with his bedtime routine, his son asked a question that captured the essence of everything they had accomplished together. Dad, do you think other kids like me will have easier lives because of the work you do? Joseph kissed his son's forehead, thinking about the scholarship fund that now supported 247 families, the workplace policies that accommodated thousands of caregivers, and the cultural shift that was gradually making corporate America more humane. I think so, buddy. I think your story is going to help lots of families find better opportunities. Good, Ethan said with the matter-of-fact satisfaction he brought to solved problems. Everyone deserves to have their dad come home happy from work. The gentle heart that had sparked a corporate revolution belonged not just to Joseph and Ethan, but to every family that refused to accept that love and livelihood had to be competing priorities. Their story had proven that authentic leadership could emerge from the most unexpected places, and that the most valuable employees might be those who brought their complete humanity to work rather than hiding inconvenient aspects of their lives. The worn cleaning cart that Joseph kept in his executive office, as a reminder of how small acts of recognition could create profound change, had become a symbol of possibility that inspired business leaders worldwide to recognize human potential in unconventional packages. Corporate America would never be the same, and that transformation had begun with one father's midnight phone call and a CEO wise enough to recognize that his devoted heart contained exactly the leadership qualities his company and the business world desperately needed. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.